Okay, welcome back. So, talking about the news, Jake. We spoke about Rex. What are we going to speak about next?
Well, talking of fleet renewals, old aircraft, and so on, we have farewelled the era of the 717 in Australia. QantasLink over the weekend did its last commercial 717 flight. This was VHYQS, did flight QF 1511 from Sydney to Canberra. That touched down at just after 6 p.m. on Saturday. Got a water cannon salute, the whole 9 yards, and now the 717 has officially been retired from the QantasLink fleet to be replaced with the brand spanking new A220-300s, which are, longer range, more efficient, more comfortable, all of these things.
So the 717s, from memory, were the kind of cornerstone of the fleet that helped build Jetstar originally.
Yeah, so it was Impulse. They got Impulse Airways.
Yeah.
Which had, the 717 fleet. They turned Impulse basically into Jetstar, and launched it with these 717s. And, then they've moved these 717s over to QantasLink, and the 717s have been operating the QantasLink flights, and they've been with Qantas for 20 years or so. More than 20 years, and now Rachel Yangoyan, the CEO of QantasLink, has said that there's the iconic T-shaped tail has had a long history in the Qantas and Jetstar fleets. She said, from being the aircraft that launched Jetstar's first ever flights in 2004 to serving major cities, regional towns, and the mining sector in the West as part of QantasLink for more than 20 years, we know our people and customers have loved flying on the 717. As we farewell the 717 in Australia and the end of an era, we are excited about the future of QantasLink jet flying aboard the A220 aircraft. We're already getting great feedback from customers and crew about the experience. She said, with almost double the range, lower emissions per seat, and a more comfortable in-flight experience, the A220s will allow us to deliver the next generation of flying for our customers and our people. So a lot of
I just think
PR
that's important. I think that's in poor taste. We're saying goodbye to the 717s, and everyone's got a tear in their eye. But they're like, but this newer model is so much prettier, and it goes so much further. Like, say that another day. Say that is not. It's not appropriate. There's a 717 going off to the boneyard in Victorville, probably.
I believe they have been, or from what I understood in May, they were a lot of them were sold to an overseas carrier. There are now only 2 airlines that are still operating the 717, those being Delta and Hawaiian over in the States.
Great trivia.
In terms of the A220s, at least the ones that Qantas is using in their configuration, they've got 25% more seats, twice the range, 28% lower fuel burn per seat. So they do offer some improvements over the venerable 717s. We also saw we've been seeing now the A220s branching out from QantasLink capital city flights and heading to places like Launceston, and over the weekend as well, Coffs Harbour. The first A220 flight for Qantas, replacing the 717s from Melbourne to Coffs Harbour, touched down on Sunday. And these new planes are allowing Qantas to bring the schedule back up from 2 weekly flights, which it was temporarily reduced to in June, back up to 5. And so they're offering Qantas more utility than the aging 717s did. So farewell to the 717. It's been a hell of a ride with the 717. We're looking to the future now with the A220s, and don't forget that Virgin Australia Regional will be getting rid of its old Fokkers soon, and switching to the new E190 E2s. So regional jets having a sort of a renaissance, if you like, in Australia, or a bit of a turnover, and maybe look out for something about that in an upcoming issue of Australian Aviation magazine.
I don't know what you're on about. Right, we've got probably time for one more story, I reckon. What are we going to seem into?
Well, we might want to talk a bit about, it's kind of interesting, a tale of 2 airports.
Go on. Go on.
These sort of came out today. Not entirely comparable stories, but there are sort of parallels. So we've seen Sydney Airport's passenger figures for the third quarter of 2024, and we've seen Perth Airport's full year financial figures. And they paint kind of different pictures. So Sydney Airport is seeing, decent year-on-year growth, but it's still below its pre-pandemic levels. So there were, over the 3 months to September, there were 10.3 million passengers. Now, that's up 3.3% on the same period last year. But in compared to 2019 levels, it's still only a 92.5% recovery. There was a 95.7% recovery for international traffic, so 4 million passengers, and that's up 5.8% on last year. But the big thing still that's holding Sydney Airport back is domestic, because domestic traffic was only 90.5% recovered, which is exactly the same as it was in the June quarter. Like, it has... The domestic recovery is stagnating. Yeah. There were 6.3 million passengers domestically, just a 1.8% improvement on last year. Now, Scott Charlton, the CEO of Sydney Airport, has said that the airport is pleased with the international traffic recovery, despite some headwinds from the supply chain that are affecting airline capacity. But one interesting thing that the airport has said is that this domestic performance is still being impacted by a shift in discretionary business travel. And we can talk a bit more about that once we get back over to Perth. Now, Perth, earlier this year, exceeded its pre-pandemic capacity for the 2023-24 financial year. It resolved this long-standing dispute with Qantas over this move to the Airport Central precinct. But Perth Airport's financial figures have been pretty good. I don't know what Sydney Airport's financials are, but Perth Airport saw a $125.4 million net profit after tax, boost in revenue across all airport operations. That includes aviation, ground transport, property, and retail. The EBITDA for financial year 2024 was $420.8 million, and these figures were both up on the previous financial year. So Perth is seeing a far stronger recovery than Sydney and, quite a few of these other airports on the East Coast. Most of this has been driven by the FIFO market. Regional and FIFO are big out in Perth, and they've sort of come back in a big way. Whereas, over in the East, that's less of a factor. But getting back to, you raised this point earlier today, Adam, when we were discussing this, is that this discretionary business travel thing might be a big part of the key that unlocks why domestic recovery is not as strong. Because, prior to the pandemic, it would have been more common for you to fly to a business meeting, and then fly back between, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, the Golden Triangle. Still some of the most valuable routes in the world. So you would fly down to Melbourne for your meeting, maybe fly down in the morning and fly back in the evening, or spend the night or whatever. Whereas this has become less common post-pandemic as we've seen more people switching to remote meetings like, Zoom. Or Microsoft Teams, if you're into that sort of thing. I don't judge.
I hate Microsoft Teams. I hate it when someone's consistent, just do it over Zoom like a decent person.
Yeah.
Not some degenerate with Microsoft Teams. Then it makes your thing crash and you can't download it.
We used Microsoft Teams at my old job. I didn't mind it. It seemed fine. I don't know why. I think rip Skype, I will say. The demise of Skype has been a sad one.
They really messed up, didn't they?
Yeah.
They were basically, they predicted all of this like 10 years ago. And then suddenly when their big moment comes, the global pandemic shutdown of the world, they weren't ready. Yeah, no, there's a great video, by the way, from Brennan Lee Mulligan, formerly of College Humor, now of Dropout, where he basically is, the CEO of Skype, and he basically goes on a long rant about how could we have messed this up? How did we lose to Zoom? What the hell is Zoom? We were the verb. We were the verb, and we messed it up. But anyway, so Zoom and Teams and, Google Hangouts and whatever, they have kind of replaced this, fly down to Melbourne for the day to attend the business meeting, because why would you go to the expense when Zoom is right there? And in Perth, that's probably less of a factor, because people in Perth, I doubt they were flying over to Sydney for business meetings on the reg. And also, if you're doing some digging in a mine, you can't do that over Zoom.
Not with that attitude.
No. But it's interesting because during COVID and when everybody was really getting into Zoom and Microsoft Teams and all this nonsense, there was an idea that aviation would never get anywhere near back to where it was before. There was an idea that all business meetings would basically stop. Everything would be done over Zoom, and you'd only get on a flight to go on holiday. And so we're now, 2, 3, 4 years on from COVID, or 2, 3 years on from the end of all these lockdown restrictions. How is it panned out? Well, the reality is probably 80% of these business trips are happening, but not 100%. People still like traveling.
And there's still, conferences and things like that. Not every conference is live streamed.
Exactly.
And you want to go in and you want to network and you want to, see the exhibitors, and you want to, make those connections that you can't do over Zoom.
But exactly. And so you had this kind of post-COVID bounce back where everyone was desperate to fly, desperate to travel. They missed it. And now we've settled, if not quite in between, then just not where we were before, because ultimately it still costs a lot of money to fly somewhere, and ultimately if you can do it over Zoom, you will do. And a good example is our sales team, our wider sales team at Momentum Media, which is a company that now owns Australian Aviation. I think they're like behind here, or they're down there somewhere. I hope they're working
behind
hard.
that screen.
Yeah, work
just
harder.
Directly behind
work
the
harder,
curtains there.
Make money. And the point is that previously, nearly all of their meetings would have been coffees. They would have been in person. But now the vast majority of their meetings will be Zoom calls, which does make sense. It's easier for everybody to do that. But nonetheless, that is an example of how, travel that would have happened doesn't happen anymore. So the argument is that we were all thinking, when do we get back to 2020? In reality, we might be 10 years away, 20 years ago. We may never quite get there. So the argument is it's almost unfair to judge the industry on where it was in 2019.
Yeah, exactly. And there's been a lot of talk about the domestic recovery, and some airports, like Perth, have exceeded it. But is the recovery worthwhile as a metric anymore?
Yeah, exactly. And it's almost like we've got to kind of rethink how this is going to work. One thing that's quite interesting, say, about Project Sunrise, about Qantas' plan to fly the A350-1000 from Sydney to London and New York, is that when they're configuring the plane, it's going to be, I think it's almost half the aircraft is going to be on premium seats. It's going to be first and
very premium heavy, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's almost like their strategy is not just to think about how many people we fly, but how much money they spend on those tickets, other ways we can monetize it. So in reality, the whole aviation industry is switching beyond just simple load factors now. And I think you're going to see that. I think you're going to see this is going to be almost a change in domestic travel as well. So, yes, I think it in a sense, it's not necessarily that unexpected, but that's just kind of where we are.
Yeah, it's a brave new world.